Hello and welcome to the Green Collar Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar, a practicing environmental attorney and former environmental scientist. This podcast is all about exploring careers in sustainability in the environmental field, what they look like, how to get started, and how to grow into them. Each episode, I sit down with professionals who have built meaningful careers in this space to hear their stories, how they got started, the challenges they faced, and the advice I have for anyone looking to break in or level up. Whether you're a student, a career changer, or just passionate about making a difference, these conversations will have something valuable for you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Let's dive right in. Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is the Green Collar Careers Podcast with your host, Jose Almanzar. Today I have with me somebody that I've been, I guess you could say, a fan for maybe most of my entire career. Today's guest is Aaron Mair, someone whose career shows just how many different paths can lead to meaningful environmental and public service work. Aaron, much to my surprise, we are both alum of Binghamton University.
Yeah.
He went on to pursue doctoral studies in political science before pivoting into public service. And for decades he worked at the New York State Department of Health. He was an epidemiological spatial analyst. He can tell us a little bit what that means, but my guess is it's using data to really understand how environmental conditions show up in human health. Throughout the course of his career, Aaron has worked across government advocacy and nonprofit leadership. He served, I believe, as the first Black president of the Sierra Club in the organization's history. And now what really, is taking all of his experience to advocating really for the inclusion of Black and Brown people in spaces where we have been historically excluded from. And this is a deeply admirable work that he's doing, both paid and unpaid. Aaron, how are you? Happy Friday. How are you doing today?
Well, first and foremost, happy Friday, and great. It's an honor to be here and do your show. And I love opportunities such as this, primarily because, again, it's not about me. It's about expanding the opportunities, careers, and minds of hopefully your listeners and all that you do. It's, in the words of my brilliant Hispanic jazz band guitarist, Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, it's been a long, strange trip, brother. And that's really what life is about. It's your journey. You don't know where it's going to end. And again, because we don't come from a society or families of privilege, we come from families of struggle, of migration. Our deep ancestry are the forced nations. And I coined that term forced nations in the wake of my struggle with my brothers of the First Nations. I mean, the First Nations of those in which the Americas are their ancestral land. And the forced nations are those who were enslaved and brought to these lands to create wealth and empire and the very capitalist system that our society thrives under, basically enslaved Africans. And so we're coming up on Martin Luther King's birthday and also Black History Month. So I want to lift those spaces, those thoughts, and those peoples in our minds in all that we do. And so, when we talk about my journey, yes, you and I come from the Hall of Champions, one of the best universities, in my opinion, that produces very bright scholars and people of great thought. And because at that time they had the Ferdinand Braudel Center, which was the World Systems Theory Center, in which it's in the sociology department, but the Ferdinand Braudel Center was really a deep Marxian scholar, deep left scholarship center and school of thought, led by Emmanuel Wallerstein, who was one of my professors and mentors, James Petrus, very solid scholar of Latin America, advisor to the Papandreou government in Greece. Again, very legend and storied academics and professional. And unlike most sociology departments, which study societies and peoples, etc., this basically had world systems theories and it had economics as a underpinning. So It's a very powerful, again, go looking at the Marxian level, what they call the material base, or every society in history depends upon a financial structure. And what traditional sociology does is strip that away and, in my opinion, obfuscates, the other factors and variables that impact the human condition, whereby the program in Binghamton was actually more of a quantitative and analytical base, which pushed for you to do a little bit more quantitative side in statistics, economics. And so there are a whole series of courses and classes that you pick up. So it was not the traditional sociology in the sociology sense. And then when I went on to the master's program with the master's in public administration and within the political science department, that department was heavily in the base of had to learn not only statistics, but you had to learn the program. And so they had a heavy overlap back when we had the key punch cards, program SPSS and SAS, data analytic models. And so, yes, for soft sciences, these were the ones that were basically data-driven analytics. And so Binghamton was very unique in that way versus Buffalo, Albany, and the other universities. And unfortunately, because over time, um, it's not as powerful in these spaces as it was when I had the privilege of gracing the halls of the State University of New York at Binghamton. So I was there when giants walked, and
Yeah.
and I've studied under numerous visiting scholars and intellectuals, and it was just a fascinating time, place, and space. And also another famous alumni is Hakeem Jeffries. He
Yes. Yes.
belonged to, and he was also in the very political science department and program that I went through.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about thought leaders and people that have come through and global thinking, uh, uh, it was a great program.
So that program, obviously heavily on the sociology, and it was really geared towards that. But your career, and obviously has sociology, probably gave you the great foundation for everything that you've done and you do in your career. But at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, Binghamton may have had a geology program and kind of a earth system science, but they probably did not have at the time, what's traditionally known as kind of, or labeled as, an environmental studies program. Is that
No,
right?
they didn't.
Yeah.
No, they didn't.
So how did you go from kind of this, early studying of sociology and history, to the evolution of your career that has been heavily focused on environmental issues and public health issues, mixed with environmental? How did that evolution take place?
Well, as I say, typical necessity. I got married,
Oh, it always comes down to that.
in the graduate school. You start having kids, and you needed money.
Yeah.
Uh, so I enlisted in the United States Navy to pay for, have money to have these children and support my wife, then Maria Pacheco, who was at that time in the graduate education program, earning her teacher's degree. So while I was in the Navy earning money, putting her through college, and a PhD at that time, putting her through, but also supporting my children. But that took me around the world. And so I actually, at that time, was able to see what I was taught about in class and see it applied, and having the analytical lens of institutional and national power and data analysis at its core. You start to see how these things start to time together. So you go from the academic to the professional applied. And then I came back, and I reached out to Richard Dekmejian, who was a professor in the political science department, but also had deep ties with the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. He had a contact in Albany, and that's what brought me to Albany in the early 80s to, be part of the PhD program. And they had these internships that connected me with the state. And I never knew about Albany and the career. Again, I did not know about the civil service and the whole game there's these generations of folks who have been able to take advantage of the system. In fact, when I came in, the big thing was tier one people, and found a lot of people my age who were in high school when I was in high school, who took those summer jobs as a lifeguard, etc., qualified them for the early and best tier retirement
That's
system.
amazing.
And so here I'm sitting here like kicking myself because I could have had a parks and recreation job, which I refused to do because I got a job at Sears. And I was looking down on my brother who took one of those jobs. And because I was earning more money. But had I had parents who, and this again, when we talk about intergenerational wealth and intergenerational growth, and you're only as good as what your parents know when we talk about intellectual and economic capital, passing it intergenerationally. If your parents don't have it, it's not within their possibility frontier, which is an economic term. You're only as good as the shoulders of the giants and the family you stand on. And if they're impoverished and poor intergenerationally, you don't have that technology or knowledge to advance to the next level. So it wasn't until I landed in this place in space that I realized just the impacts institutionally, again, sociologically, how these factors limit a people, a race, and a perspective. And so I ended up interning in the Department of Social Services. And because I had a lot of analytical and computer and systems background, I ended up in something called the MMIS, Medicaid Management Information System.
Okay.
So I formally, at that point, because I already had a lot of computer skills and programming skills, and econometric modeling and data analytical skills. And then they would become part of the predictive and analytical model that I was able to bring to the job. So while albeit having a political science and sociology background and history background, the preparation of those courses, this is where that stuff where you think is not important in college, math does matter. Economics does matter. Interdisciplinary analysis does matter. So just don't get focused on your major. Look at those because everything is about data. We talk about AI and everything else. All of these are about modeling. They're all based upon modeling human behavior that goes all the way back to Talcott Parsons, the famous preeminent sociologist of their day, evolutionary biologist. So these people, these sciences are anchored in some of the oldest sociological sciences that actually began in biostatistics or statistics began in sociology.
Well,
Bam.
that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love this space, both professionally in what I do, but also on a very personal level. I love reading about environmental, issues of our time and how we can try to get better the planet and ourselves, both on the two kind of the biggest issues in our generation. Aaron, you may disagree with me, but I think it's really climate change and biodiversity loss. And from that, it stems and into so many different areas. But
Well, no, I actually agree. What happens is most people don't, and again, when I talk about being world systems theory, when we talk about
yeah,
historical processes, how things are all connected. John Muir had the thesis of if you pull at the string of one thing, you'll find it's all hitched and connected to everything else.
hmm
For that thinking of systems, how he organically came to a systems analysis in his career was what also gravitated to me. But before I began my journey as the first national president of the world's largest environmental NGO, an organization that gave us our National Park Service, by the way.
hmm
I was the 57th president or 57th John Muir who served in that space and place. But I rose there because of an incident that happened in Albany, New York, which led me to be a pioneer, one of the founders of what is now the national and international environmental justice movement. At that time, when I got in the 80s, toxic waste and race study was not yet published. And toxic
hmm
waste and race studies, is published by the author is Dr. Charles Lee, and the other scholar that initiated the study is Dr. Benjamin Chavis of the United Church in Christ out of Harlem.
yep,
And they were doing that analysis in response to the toxic dumping in North Carolina and other places in space. And what they want, the big question was, were the decisions to engage in these activities linked to race? And again, tying into the notion of the civil rights, that this is another dimension of racial discrimination and racial second class citizenship. And they actually were responding to a series of lawsuits in the early 80s and late 70s and early 80s that were being lost because they could not prove that there was a link between race, decision-making, racism, and the public policy outcomes, connecting public policy and discretionary public policy analysis and the outcomes from boards, zoning boards, and other decision makers that government engages in and racism. So in other words, they want to explore, was the connection of institutional racism linked to these institutions and decision-making process in the dynamics of power of the powerful versus the powerless. And so they did that analysis that ended up actually proving that racism and race was a factor that led to the impacts, the disproportionate impacts of as I say, negative public policy outcomes and negative policy decision making of where allocation of amenities like sewage treatment plants, landfills would happen, and race, which is a huge breakthrough. Which is
all connected, and it took the unfortunate unfortunate things like which we still see today, obviously, disproportionate
in my case in particular,
yeah.
Was that I was working at the health department, and I chose to live in a community called Arbor Hill, was
Yep.
a historically Black community, and I chose to raise my daughters there. Upwardly young, middle-class profession. My wife's a school teacher. I'm a manager managing a big data system in the health department. And I chose because it's a walkable distance to the job. But also there was Arbor Hill Elementary School at the bottom of the street, and I built my house right on the outsides of a major nature preserve because I wanted my kids to have access to a nature preserve. And the middle school up on the left. So the school would have been walking distance from K through 8 for my children. But I did not know I was building my house in the middle of the prevailing winds of a solid waste incinerator. And my daughters were poisoned by that incinerator. And that was my entree in the mid 80s into the struggle against environmental pollution, its impact on human health. I'm working in a public health field as a data system analyst. And I had this big analytical background and lens. And so I actually started doing an analysis on the decision making that cited the incinerator in the heart of that Black community, and found that race was a race in poverty, but race in particular, as a consequence of poverty, led to the decision to site the solid waste incinerator in the heart of a Black community. And this solid waste incinerator was the power plant for the entire New York State government apparatus, which is the Capitol buildings, the legislative buildings, the judiciary, and the governor's mansion, and the state library. And they burned garbage for an 8-county region, which included mostly whites. So basically all the whites in the surrounding suburbs and exurbs were sending their garbage to Albany to be burnt in the heart of a Black community to poison the Black community. And my daughters and my wife had severe health consequences as a result of it. And it was my data analysis that exposed that. And because of my training and background and working with large data sets and research working within the state, I was able to prove and show and take that to battle. And I had to sue the state of New York. And at that time, it's basically commit class suicide. Because if I'm going to, most people rise by kissing the brass ring. We see that today where the Nobel Prize laureate, she is giving her Peace Prize so that she can actually appease the imperialism that's going on in Venezuela as a member of the oligarch class. And we see that. A lot of people of color will sell out to go up. And I was that says, no. It's not about financial gain for me and an opportunity. If you're poisoning my people, my family, my children, as a father defending his daughters, I leaned in, and whatever the consequences, I sued then my bosses, which is the state health commissioner and the governor of the state of New York. And one of the first historic and largest environmental justice settlements in the early 90s from a struggle that began in the mid 80s ever under the banner of environmental justice. And I was at that time represented by the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. We had, the $1.6 million settlement, and it was the largest in that time ever ever in history. And so that put me on that path that you can not only fight, but you can beat and win. And as you know, professionally, that did wonders. I mean, I was under investigation and
I'm
watched,
sure.
monitored.
Made a
Uh,
lot of enemies.
well, and that is the tragedy. Remember, now I'm a political scientist, public policy, sociologist, all that's going through my mind, and I'm looking at the power of the institution as it is arrayed against an idea and a struggle. But then when you put in the factor of race in that, and seeing how that institutional power can attack me for standing up for environmental as a function of my employment. But can you imagine what it means when that power, and again, this is the power of having that systemic analysis and coming up from that Binghamton Ferdinand Bordell Center in sociology and again, world systems theory, you can understand the weight and power, the coercive power of institutions on governments, nation states, people, tribes around the globe. And so it's mind blowing at a number of levels. But when you're trained in the field and have the tools to apply, you can bring about great change. And that was one of the big pieces, is that how do you leverage that individual power to make institutional changes? And that's the foundational piece that an academic program at SUNY Binghamton gave me, but I was able to operationalize.
So I want to, I want to pause here for just one moment to just recognize, and I know that you've been lauded many times throughout your career, but as somebody who personally has experienced environmental, injustice, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago. I had the honor of being a guest on Aaron's radio program, and you highlighted this, that as a young person I had experienced personally environmental injustice, and that I was exposed to contaminated water that almost killed me as a young person. And I was so young, and my parents didn't have the resources to, and we were in Dominican Republic. The things just
A peripheral nation from world systems theory, it's still a peripheral nation integrated into a world economy at a subordinate state where pollution can be dumped on an entire nation as
yeah.
part of the industrial processes to create proper profit within the core, which is the United States and European markets. But go on, my brother.
Yeah, and what I wanted to just say here was, I want to just take a moment here, um, and just say thank you, Aaron, for putting yourself in the crosshairs. But I think you almost were left with no choice. You saw the situation, and you could have done one of two things, I guess.
Sold
You
out.
you could have left and just say, "Hey, you know what? That's somebody else's problem. I'm gonna move to a neighborhood that doesn't deal with this, and I'm gonna just, worry about my family and their safety." But you chose to really stand up and fight, and I'm gonna just say thank you for doing that, because in many ways, it's an inspiration. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but was it around this time that you then decided to just go all in on what we now know to be environmental justice and the fight, against environmental injustice?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I saw the deficit in this place and space, and with my tools and talent, I leaned into the space and expanded it to the movement that you now see international. I was not the father of the movement. That was Ben Chavis and Charles Lee and a great scholar who I call the Ben Franklin, not the father of the movement, Robert Bullard. We all came together in 1993 at the first People of Color Summit, in which we pulled together the national and international voices that was then, and I was one of the pioneer founders of the National Black Environmental Justice Movement in 93. But we began to leverage our weight and our talents, those who were researchers, those who were academics, and those who were system science and data analysts like myself. And at that point in time, because I was mapping as part of the cost containment measures, which the state paid for, my whole trainings with regards to GIS and spatial analysis, doing pioneering work with GIS. Uh, and um, and so from that, I was able to put on real maps and map real data with spatial analysis in the 90s, pioneering work that I was done. And then I would use it as part of reapportionment battles with the NAACP and voting rights and leveraging as a cause of harm is that you not only that you choose your right to be represented, but people who can take your voice when they are doing what they call the decision making of elected leaders that result in outcomes that can poison you. And so it was the first causes of action. For over 30 years, I was participant with the NAACP, 3 decades, in leveraging environmental justice and environmental justice injustice harms as a cause of action. And we won 3 successful federal voting rights claims in which you can now go into law. You see the Arbor Hill series of lawsuits and voting rights cited. I think 2 times we ended up on the front page of the New York Law Review, our cases. So it's the impact of the skills and analysis and the tactical decisions of pushing them into spaces, into the legal landscape. These were intentional designs, and this technology, because of my background and professional training in expanding the movement, were gifts I gave to our people, to the movement, and to the struggle.
So I want to so this is a great kind of segue into the next question that I'm going to ask you, because you had these foundational skill sets that you obtained while at Binghamton, and you were on this academic track. It seemed to me that you were on your way probably to perhaps getting a PhD and maybe becoming a professor, extremely learned, and then you pivoted into public service, obviously through the reasons that you explained earlier. But for somebody who is kind of in this, pivotal point in maybe their career or their early career where they're thinking that they're going in one direction, but then want to pivot to something else. What are some questions that maybe they should be asking themselves, especially if maybe they don't have an environmental background, but maybe they have an interest in environmental careers? Like, what are some things that if you were mentoring or advising somebody who has no experience in environmental, but is just really passionate about this and they want to enter, what would you say to them?
Well, 2 things. You know, life will always give you choices. And career paths, though not clear, in many cases opaque, they present choices. And then the whole environment, society, where you're working at, will give you a set of choices. And the most important piece that you got to have confidence in is yourself and your skills. And so, one of the things you want to be in an institution that gives you the decision making skills, the skills of querying, the skills of formulating a question, a hypothesis, predictive analytics, meaning that do I have the tools that'll help me be able to take a lot of variables and look at an outcome, and whether that outcome, if I have to choose to take that outcome, is that the optimal outcome? Because sometimes you can have the optimal outcome present itself, but because of organizational politics and self-preservation, you may choose not to take that option. We see that right now with the national government. There are a lot of people who are deciding at the military level whether or not a lawful order should be followed or an unlawful order. These are choices. And that comes down to your training, your mentors, your foundational academic compass, but your moral compass that you're developing over time. You are developing a code of ethics, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And these things will have a profound impact on the choices that you make. I could have made a lot of choices, what I call the Black conservative choice. People say, and that's bias. A lot of Black conservatives, what that means oftentimes is that you'll side with the institution at the expense of others so that there may be some recognition. But oftentimes there's pecuniary gain. People do a lot of things for the money. And and that's the downside of our civil society, the pursuit of mammon or the pursuit of money, pursuit of financial gain at the expense of nature, humanity. And at the end of the day, you cannot eat and digest dollars, cents. It has no nutritional value. Yes, you can purchase stuff, but when you've destroyed all that is beneath you and above you and around you and the very air you breathe, then that cost becomes at a point where you no longer have the wealth to consume in order to live and prosper. You've destroyed the very ecosystem around you that you want to so-called thrive in. Your ideal of the perfect state is actually, again, going back to that Marxian analysis or world system analysis, is driven by material base. And you got to decide whether that material base is worth the ecological and societal consequences that may result from some of the decision making and choices that you have. And that's where a lot of the ethics and philosophical choices. And again, as you're specializing in your major in college, don't shirk the philosophy side. Don't shirk the economic side. Always find a course that teaches, if you're in any university, two courses that you got to teach. The courses on Marx Capital 1 and Marx Capital 2. They are just as important as Calculus 1 and Calculus 2. You know, Calculus 1 and Calculus 2 are very foundational to the other sciences that may take you and grow you. But the Capitalist 1 and Calculus will take you to the historical analysis of the human condition as it relates to money, capital, progress, and, as I say, the labor theory of value. So those are at least the critical intellectual calculus courses that you need on top of the other mathematical calculus.
So I want to, I think you said something really important here, Aaron, which is that we need to remember, and for those listening, you have agency.
Yes.
You have agency, and yes, don't get me wrong.
And that's what college is about: developing, knowing, and becoming conscious of agency. What is agency? How to use it? And the question is, who are you lending your agency and your power for? Is it for your people or yourself, and yourself at the expense of your people? Very powerful concepts that you don't pick up until college for most people of color, is they're the first generation to experience that level of intellectual development. Whites are basically on fourth and fifth generation of understanding agency and power and development.
I have to tell you, my entire career, and I wish somebody would have, kind of sat me down, or I would have had the some of this kind of presented to me. But many times in life, we feel that we're just being dragged along by circumstances. And when you really look back, you have, like you said, you have choices to make.
Yep.
And the choices are there, and sometimes it's binary. I mean, sometimes it's that simple. It's binary. It's a yes or no thing. And I get it. If you have a family to feed and you're in dire straits, you sometimes just got to take the job that's in front of you for the moment. But at some point, you will have an opportunity to make a decision as to whether you're going to continue a certain path or pivot to something else. And for those of you that are interested in joining Aaron in this space and the work that we do, encouraging stewardship for the environment and caring for your fellow brothers and sisters, you have a choice to make. And you, not to say that you have to do that professionally. Some people have the privilege to do what they're interested in to further a cause as a professional, but sometimes life doesn't lend itself that way. But you still have choices to make, and the choice and the power is yours. Now, Aaron, for people that do not have an environmental background but want to break into this space, we both work in different spaces and trying to encourage the green economy and encourage training and encouraging others to join the green economy. What do you think some of the skill sets and what's really important to employers out there?
Well, you and I work for a client, and we through at different levels. One of my clients has been the Hydro-Quebec, and the current pipeline of electricity from Canada to New York City. I was the advocate, and I was the EJ expert witness to help do the analysis of that contention that shut down the Indian Point nuclear power plant. So in other words, I took 23% of power for New York City off the grid. And yet I'm advocating, knowing that this is a growing demand for power, If I'm taking 23% off, I got to replace that. And it's not only what you're against, like nuclear power, which is a dirty, dangerous power. Everybody wants to bring it back, and I criticize the governor on that. But we actually have access to other paths, whether solar, wind, and hydro. And I worked on a relationship that helped heal the environmental injustice relationship between the Mohawk Nation's people, as well as the folks in Quebec, helped produce a just solution, which was the new Champlain Hudson Power Express cooperation between the Mohawks as well as the government of Canada to deliver that energy to New York City. I then, as a consultant, a community consultant, because a lot of people were worried about the EJ issues. So I was a consultant for Hydro-Quebec and helped facilitating that connection and leveraging my credibility because of the good work that I've done and because of my good name, which I cherish. We got that project now that's going to be near completion, the first of its kind in New York State. And it could deliver more, but it's delivered jobs. And we also helped the company of Hydro-Quebec develop sustainable relationship with communities of color in a proper way, not a tokenistic way. Which help transform how they integrate and do community relations, which a lot of American energy sector or private sector entities refuse to do. So, being that platform and that voice, your career choice and paths can actually lead you to space. New York City has another threat and risk. Everybody takes drinking water for granted. Right now, the biggest career path, even for a high school student with basic high school chemistry, can get into the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, in the solid waste and water sector, and learning how to purify and maintain New York City's drinking water. These are jobs that are earning right now six-figure, high five-figure, going up to six-figure incomes right now in the sanitary, in the water department, in DEP, and just basic water chemistry. And you can come out of high school doing that, but you go to community college, CUNY, and SUNY, and working in that and start to replace the aging workforce right now that DEP needs. Transforming your personal wealth, your intellectual, and your family's wealth. People, I want to be a cop or a fireman. Why? Because they got good jobs and security. But DEP, environmental protection in New York City, has also city parks, maintaining the ecosystems within New York City right now, are high-paying jobs. But a lot of youth of color do not see themselves in those jobs because, just like me, it wasn't until I got exposed to the civil services that I saw the opportunities here. It's the issue of exposure. So right now, I've created a program, the Timbuktu Summer Science and Career Program, with the SUNY ESF, Environmental Science and Forestry, creating those, let's say, the career pathway for youth to find themselves from high school to college in that pathway. And I'm a proud partner with the State University of New York, the chancellor, and out of Syracuse, the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, which is connected up in the Adirondacks, that are getting a new career pathway for youth from New York City metro over 5 boroughs. And again, Senator Mair of Brooklyn, these folks, Assemblywoman Zinnerman, these folks have been key. New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus have been key partners and allies. And again, leveraging my knowledge to be a builder of pathways, a blazer, cutting down the rough path so another generation can walk through. So I've been, as I said, from creating a movement, leading a movement, stepping into a place to save the planet and humanity, because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, but also showing that you can absolutely have a meaningful career, and not to mention the law profession, environmental law, going to school, become a pre-law. Binghamton is one of the best places for pre-law. My youngest daughter is going to the pre-law program. Again, all of these are wonderful career pathways in which a person right now just needs the mentorship of programs just like this, so that we can help them see a way out of no way at the most critical juncture in their lives of trying to find a career and an idea of who and what they want to be.
Aaron, I'm noticing in kind of the larger society, almost like an awakening, and a mass movement towards wanting to pivot from the traditional way that we've done business and that we've gone about treating the earth as just a basin of resources and completely putting it aside for the for really for economic gain. And there's a slow awakening of people that are saying, wait, this is not right, because what good, to your point, what good is creating capital if we're poisoning the people and the animals and the plants and the water and the resources around us in the process? Society will not make it another 100 or 200 years if we keep down this path. So what I like to do is, there's a feeling that people get, and it comes in either when they're sleeping, or they're working out, or they're napping, or they're deep in flow in conversation with others, where they get a feeling. And the feeling might be towards fixing some sort of injustice. And I hear conversations from people that contact me and say, Jose, I, something hit me and I want to contribute to this cause, but I don't know how to do it. So that's the purpose for this, is to give people kind of a platform, or at least to give them ideas as to how to start toying with this idea of, hey, I want to make the world a better place, and I really care about this environment and this planet. um, I want to do this professionally. So, Aaron, you've had a long, career, and you're going to continue having, impact and a long career going forward. But looking back to, if you could sit down with young Aaron, the Binghamton senior, my guess is you probably had a lot more hair than you and I have now. What would you tell, that young Aaron, if you could give him advice about his career, his choices, and how to navigate, his future?
Well, that young Aaron was just a sponge, overwhelmed and having his world rock by that experience. My advice to that young Aaron, as well as to those who are going to be listeners in your show: trust yourself.
Hmm.
Uh, Never stop asking the questions of your professors. But the most fundamental question is that, listen, I'm going to be a senior. Uh, can you plug me into internships that would put me, in a place that would get me the places that may have career opportunities.
Yeah.
I found the New York City Urban Fellows was a program. And then I found out that it was co-opted and controlled by the top Ivy Leagues. Even though I did the best interview there, they called it enthusiasm. And they were then displacing kids from Harvard, Yale, et cetera, because they felt that promoting the Ivies gave them, accolades. So you learn that life is not going to be fair. You can be the best and most qualified individual, but if the program like the Urban Fellows thinks that State University of New York is beneath its consideration, rather than the qualification and the expertise in the interview of you know of the individual and the student before them, don't beat yourself up because you don't get the internship or the fellowship. It's their loss. And the fact that the Urban Fellows did not tap me, it was their loss, because at the end of the day, I ended up with a internship and fellowship in Albany that actually put me in a better position and put me in the destiny and the path of destiny that I've been on, that I've actually helped shape information and thought leaders in the environmental and climate space at a point in time that the Earth and planet needed. So trust yourself, but always ask your leaders, your the things that the mentors do control, or the mentoring opportunities, the career opportunities that put you actually in the applied space. Getting applied knowledge is really, really critical. Either whether it's a law office working on environmental, but you can just go to a clerk, you're fetching papers, but you get to read law cases. You get to learn the process behind how these things are done. You get how a case is made. People don't realize this old saying, pejoratively saying, in the law profession, you can sue a ham sandwich. But what the point that people miss is that if you make a case, of course you can. And a case is a theory, okay? and you can make a theoretical argument. And it's until you lay that argument upon the table and debate with other people who got a counter case. And if you prevail, it's not that your idea is right, but your idea won. If your case wins, that's the critical piece. And so law system doesn't necessarily dispense justice in a fair sense. It just basically those who make the better argument win. So the point that your training centers you on is, how do I make and frame that argument? How do I make that case for myself? The first case that you got to ever make is for yourself and for your career. And what's that case you as a student or young Aaron want to make? How do you want to argue that? Do you have the tools? Has your training given you the skill set to make that argument, to frame that argument? In the case of Aaron Mair, when pressed with the career-changing case of fighting against an incinerator lawsuit controlled by the governor of the state of New York, the commissioner of the health department, people who you're taught to subordinate yourself to. But when you see an injustice, still stand for that justice and rely upon your training to make that additional case. And then, as I say, when you win, a lot of things happen. New paths open up. The things that you, what they call the song "An Amazing Grace," once blind, but now I see. Things that you could not see, you can now see because you went through that trial.
I'm gonna, Aaron, we're approaching, I know I gave us a hard stop, and I've completely missed that because I could speak with you for hours, brother. I'm gonna say one thing, and then I'm gonna ask you two quick questions. One is gonna be kind of just a bonus question, but the one thing I want to emphasize to people, and just to to refresh what you just said: trust yourself, and then ask for help. And I want to just
Prepare yourself, trust yourself, and
Mhm.
then ask.
So I want to just use a quick anecdote on my career. As you know, Aaron, I was an environmental scientist for a bit before I pivoted to law. And when I graduated from law school, my resume was stacked with environmental experience. And I studied and directed my career and my studies on environmental, and I had a nice resume. And even with that, I struggled to break into the environmental legal space. And I applied to probably 80 or so different law firms. I knew I wanted to do environmental litigation, and I applied to about 80 different law firms. I received zero callbacks. And this is back when, before now you can apply on LinkedIn and you just click on something and you can apply to things, in 2 minutes.
Mhm.
I was sending out cover letters and resumes and hand signing them. I must have spent about $1,000 FedExing things. Not one callback. And Aaron, you know what? I continued pursuing that law firm. There was one law firm I really wanted to work for, and I asked and asked and asked, and eventually I basically told the managing partner that I was willing to work in his mailroom. Now, mind you, I had an environmental science degree, I had worked as a field scientist, and I had a law degree with internships at the Attorney General's office, New York City DEP, and the EPA. And I was willing to, because I just wanted access to what I was sure of, which was environmental litigation. So for those of you listening, you have to be prepared, as Aaron said, trust yourself, and then you just have to be persistent and keep trying and not take rejection personal, and not take the first rejection as a sign from the universe that you don't belong. Aaron, I'm gonna ask you a quick question just so we can wrap this up. For those listening that really care about making a difference, but maybe they feel unsure or stuck in their careers, what are some words of encouragement that you would give to them?
Well, it's my Crispus Attucks, since we're in the Revolutionary 250th phase of American history. It's my Crispus Attucks theory, and he was a victim of the Liberty Conspiracy. Uh, at that point in time, as it was illustrated in the first and early drafts of the Declaration of Independence, it was laid as a charge against the crown that they were the cause of slavery and the enslavement of the African race in the Americas, that this was a sin that was foisted upon America and a revolutionary ground to revolt. And blacks like Crispus Attucks, heard that. And it was transformative because all of a sudden a veil drifted from his face about his condition and why he was in America, to the point that he led a group of whites in Boston, what would become the Boston Massacre, in which he was to basically rebel strongly, fierce, and be the first to take a shot in the chest, to die for what would become the American Revolution. The picture of the Boston Massacre as a broadside became the foundational image that inspired people, yeomen all around the 13 colonies to rise up and break off the yoke of colonial oppression by then the Crown King. And the fact that it was an African American to be the first to be shot by the police, which would become a theme right to this day, because remember, the redcoats were the police of their day. So, the end of the day, we always must risk all for the cause of justice, liberty, and growth. Economics is nothing more than the means by which one can survive in this system. You can get the training of the world, but if you are inspired and that this is the career, it will be your life. I spent 36 years with the New York State Department of Health, being a public health professional, advocate, applying and getting that training and honing my skills and knowledge, becoming a top spatial analyst, basically a guy that used GIS and mapping and analysis to, as I say, to deliver public health. I was the guy that was responsible for what they call the Ebola protocol. That's where the screenings of folks coming in into an airport based upon their visas had put into different paths and screened so that they could accurately find out who may be a public health risk. When we had that first meeting, they wanted to actually take anybody in a U.S. census that identified themselves as African and declare them as a risk category. So just solely based upon your race or heritage, you were automatically deemed a vector of risk for public health in the United States. That was the first thing. And again, a white guy came up with that thesis. It sounds logical, right? Because Ebola is coming from Africa. So if in the census, we normally use the census for data analysis and public health. So why not anybody identified as African? And we put quarantine vectors around these particular areas. And I go, no, that shit's racist. I go, you can't do that. There are better ways that we do that. And I had to rely upon my military training and my contacts in the State Department. Says, listen, let me make a few calls. And the thing that we get is something called a visa. And these visas are given by country. You know where you come and go. They go on a particular plane. So that person with that visa is tracked on a plane. So you can absolutely find out who has, and it's like, it's not that it was the obvious answer that people could see it. No, that's easy. No, it's not. Right now, the billion dollar idea is the guy that sees it first and then monopolizes it and makes himself a multi-billion dollar corporation. The idea, once you see it applied, people say, oh, that's easy. Bullshit. You didn't have it. But once you're able to connect these systems and these facts, it gives you a model by which you can effectively screen regardless of race, but that is a rational model, like a visa. Because remember, people travel regardless of the color. Once they get that visa, you can find out not only where they came from, what ports or whatever that may be of specific places of risk. And then once they get on a flight where people from all over goes to an airport and to get on that flight, now that whole population can be considered contaminated. Now you can track everybody on that flight once they get to Europe or whatever, and you can start tracking what they call contact tracing these people, and that's how you track them without traumatizing the entire race based upon the fact that they're African ancestry. That's the problem with mainstream majority white thinking, and they create these blunt force instruments whereby they traumatize whole populations, like we see right now with immigration and customs enforcement. They've given the Proud Boys and all these other entities the color of police authority, and they just right now walk up to a brown, black, or yellow person and just say, well, you look foreign. Give me your papers. How many Black Americans, indigenous Americans, walk around with papers? And all of a sudden, if you're white, you're not asked that. See, this is the point, and I think that, we have career opportunities that train us and allow us to focus in upon these conditions and these questions. So I go right back to my Crispus Attucks thesis in not having fear, but once your mind is open and clear, you take that risk, you take that challenge, not because you will gain personally, but it is the condition of an entire people that were enslaved. And it's the condition of an entire people that will be infected. It's the condition in the legal terms, what they call a class of people. You take that challenge. You seek that career because this is the profession and this is the destination, this is the location where you can absolutely have an impact on an entire class of people because you made the case that you are an individual that brings unique talents and skill to a profession, to a firm that would actually do the best good in the just way.
Aaron, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and for those words. Your story, your perspective, and your wisdom is going to live on, and I'm really so honored that you were able to join me today. Your career is a good reminder, really powerful reminder that there's no single path to this work, and where you start out is not necessarily where you're going to be a few years and your whole life, and just persistence and sticking to your guts and trusting yourself is always the best bet. Thank you for the work you've done, Aaron, and the paths you've helped create and you will be creating. And really just wishing you a wonderful day, rest of the year, and just keep fighting the great fight.
See you in the field, my brother.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Green Collar Careers Podcast. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing their time and insights with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps more people discover the podcast. You can also support the show by leaving a review or sharing this episode with someone who might find it helpful. And if there's a topic or guest you'd love to hear from, please let me know. DM me, reach out, shoot me an email. Thanks again for being part of this community, and I'll see you again next time.